So they say the first subdivision was of the Sangre de Cristo land grant into the Costilla estate and the Trinchera estate. And we're now on the former Costilla estate. We're approaching the town of Masita. Masita is interesting because it was one of the pre-planned communities that the Castilla Land Development Company wanted to attract farmers to from outside Colorado. And specifically, they were looking to attract Germans from Iowa, and they named it Hamburg, thinking that'll do it. And it didn't work, but now it's, yeah, blink and you've gone through. So, like a lot of those towns, it just slowly went away.
I'm sure everything was tied to the availability of water, which went away if it was ever even there. Randomly, you'll come across foundations. So there were people that lived out here. Castilla Estates owned all of this. They planned on bringing people from Europe.
The Costilla estate became private ranches and was then part of a development corporation, and eventually sold some of this land that we're on to the Bankers Trust Company, which ran a cattle and small agriculture operation around here.
So like say, I was born and raised in this community.
All this land belonged to Troy and his family. It was sort of the center of their cattle operation.
My dad was one of the last of the true cowboys. Dad migrated here. He was born and raised up in northern Wyoming. And my mom was a native of Alamosa, but she was teaching school up in Cody, Wyoming, and she met my dad at a rodeo. A friend of hers introduced him, and as the old saying goes, the rest is history.
That abandoned building was a bunkhouse. Then this other building with the metal roof was the mess hall. Troy grew up in a building that no longer exists to the left of me, and now he lives in this house with the biggest tree on the prairie.
We moved here in, I want to say I'm positive it was the spring of '72. It was after it was subdivided out here, but there wasn't anyone out here. Went to work for my mom and dad on the ranch for several years, driving truck in the wintertime and farming in the summertime. And the old-timers that have grown up and lived here their entire lives said, yeah, you know, people come here and then they get too broke to leave, so here we are. And that's pretty much the size of it. All the small ranchers and farmers that used to grow some hay, grow a few potatoes, you know, and they've all just disappeared over the years, and the big farms have moved in and taken over. I love it here. I mean, of course, this is home to me. This is pretty much the only home I've ever known. I like the quiet. It's not as quiet as it was when I grew up out here, that's for sure.
We will see places I'm used to because they've been here for years, and then new settlements that have popped up just over the summer because that's when people arrive.
It's gone on for years. It's just gotten more and more every year. Grace nailed it. She says it best. I mean, neighbor season. She's like, yeah, we're neighbor season because people just start flocking out here like a bunch of disoriented turkeys.
Sometimes they'll leave their dwelling on it if it's a trailer, or they'll have started to build a house and they'll leave a foundation, and sometimes they won't be back till the spring, and sometimes they'll never be back.
We've got quite a few of them that are they're committed enough that they're actually putting down roots. Technology has really opened up a whole new field and a whole new opportunity for people to come out here and live and actually even work, get solar power and wind power and whatnot. Up until people started moving here, pretty much the only thing they got out of this old arid, vast expanses of land were just taxes, and land taxes were dirt cheap on it because, you know, it was just totally unimproved and to a certain degree, uninhabitable.
In the 1970s, you'd come out here and reasonably imagine that this was all going to become a subdivision, a community of some kind. And now in the 2020s, you can see if that's going to happen, it's not going to be for a long time. I want to just make sure I don't have a flat. I guess it was mud. Back we go. I mean, there's a dystopian aspect to this area, that we're on roads that were built so that a realtor could sell little 5-acre plots of land, and so that the county could start collecting taxes on that land. You will find lots for sale for $5,000. That's one of the great appeals for people who've paid rent and utilities and gotten behind in all those things. You're your own landlord. And so that is the starting fact. The downside is that it's really hard to actually live out here. My sister in Denver told me that she'd been to the San Luis Valley and seen a presentation at Puente about people living off grid on bare bones minimum, right? Like parking their RV on prairie and then adding a plywood addition and getting water from a spring. And I had no idea people were really living like this in Colorado, which made me feel a little bit ignorant, because I think it happens in several parts of the state. I've kind of returned to this approach time after time, which has been called immersion writing or immersion journalism, where you're learning not just by people's answers, but by your whole experience, and you can be part of the story. I thought, as journalism, this has lots of potential. It's so different in ways that I wanted to know more about. When I open this door, you're going to see stuff that like boxes I put here. So this is the camper trailer I bought in order to be able to live out on the flats when I was starting work for La Puente. La Puente is a social service organization based in Alamosa. It was founded by nuns as a homeless shelter in the 70s. It was one of the nation's first homeless shelters in a rural area. And it's 25 feet long, and I rented a little plot of land at the Gruber family homestead. One of my first days out here on the prairie, my job was to introduce myself as a volunteer for La Puente. And I would just drive up to people's property, and a lot of people, really don't want you on their property, and I hadn't quite figured it out. And I drove right up to this guy's circle of trailers, and this guy peeked out. He had his hand in the pocket of his hooded sweatshirt, and I thought, oh, this isn't good. And I said, hey, I'm Ted from La Puente, and he goes, yeah. We chat a little, and then he said, you're either really brave or really dumb to be driving down a driveway like this. And I said, yeah, probably really dumb. There are outcasts of various kinds, people with warrants out for them and convicted child molesters. They're a few lots away from the Christian family homeschooling their kids. And there are squatters, and there are people out here who everybody knows are involved in drugs, and often they're associated with things going missing from outside your place. You're limited by the cost of gasoline. Getting into town and back is a huge burden for a lot of people. Occasionally somebody will get a job in a town like Antonito or La Jara or maybe San Luis, but it's always tenuous, because if your car breaks down, you're not going to show up for work and you're going to lose your job. I've heard that story so many times. I was a cashier and my car broke down, and that was that. Locals will tell you that where it really loses its luster is in the winter, when it's just cold and gray and the wind is blowing, and it takes extra money to stay warm. And La Puente was responding to that when they started the program that I volunteered for. They were noticing all these people showing up at the shelter in Alamosa who were living out on the flats and suddenly got cold, and they have to come into town. And so they tried to prevent that kind of homelessness, which isn't what I ever thought of as homelessness before. Several of my neighbors bought their 5 acres sight unseen. Rains wash out the roads all the time, and they get in really terrible shape. You might wonder if this is even a road. Some of them get giant anthills, some of them get prairie dog colonies in the middle, and you'll see little heads popping up as you drive down.
They learn that it's really easy to get lost.
It looks a lot the same.
And it's hard to find your property.
But I think I know where we are.
Well, that's what Google's for. Well, what if Google don't work?
We find them miscellaneously driving up and down roads because they know the road their property's on, but there's no way to find it.
Yeah, you know what? There's the Grubers. I turned one too soon. You have to look for very subtle signs. I missed it. And then on the left is the Gruber's first homestead out here, and to the right of it is the RV that they lived in before they bought the mobile home. And before they lived in the RV, they lived in a tent. And friends of theirs lived in this abandoned school bus up here.